Okay, cool. All right, so it should be recording. Yes, okay, sweet. Okay, so welcome to the homework review for today. We are going to be going over a demonstration on Ruby on Rails and React. We're going to be doing React the SSR way with Webpack. So I think starting probably next week or the week after that, we'll start using React in a different way, and that's how we will be using it going forward. It's very similar. There's just some small differences, but for now, we'll be doing it the SSR version way. And yeah, so for the app today, I wanted to make sure that I incorporated some Faker data so that if any of you are unsure on how to use Faker, we can get that subject covered and hopefully get you guys some good reference that you can use in the future. So I was going through the Faker information here and I saw there's all this, there's so much stuff. And what I decided to do is, because I want to just make it as varied as possible and just show kind of the possibility of models. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a Pokemon app. And what we're going to do is we're going to have Pokemon and we're going to have trainers, Pokemon trainers. You guys are familiar with Pokemon. They are.
Yeah, that's what I was doing.
Oh, it is? Nice. Okay, well, this will be extra for you, so. Yeah. But yeah, so Pokemon trainers are small children who capture innocent animals and force them to battle with the animals owned by other small children known as trainers. It's a vicious cycle. It never ends. Today, we're going to be creating a website that shows Pokemon trainers, and then it also will list the Pokemon that each trainer has. So that's going to be our app. We want to be able to see a list of Pokemon trainers and then go in and see what Pokemon they have. We want to then be able to do CRUD actions on those. So we want to ideally be able to add a new trainer, delete a trainer, update an existing trainer, and do all those same actions with the Pokemon. So add a new Pokemon to a trainer's collection, delete one, etc. So that's what we're going to be going over today. So where I am so far is, up to this point, I have run Rails, the Rails new command, create a brand new instance of a Rails project. I have set it up using with the Webpack React. I've installed the React Rails gem into my gem file. I have also added a couple other gems. I added pry rails, better errors, binding of collar. Pry rails is a debugging tool. Better errors makes the error page, when you do get an error in your Rails application, it makes it a little more informative. It's a little easier to read as well. And I think that's it. And we have the React Rails down here. Oh, and I've also added Faker here. So I've done that. I have also created my database. I think, yes, I've created my database, and that is literally all I've done. So let's go ahead and jump in and get started. I wanted to see how far we can get. So I'm going to kind of go through this very beginning part a little bit quicker than normal, just so we can try to get into some CRUD actions. But again, if you have any questions, seriously, stop me, raise your hand. If anything is unclear, be like, I don't know what this is. Can you explain it more clearly? Please let me know, and I can definitely do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is, I think I've mentioned this before, but when I set up a brand new web application, I like to first delve into my backend and then work on the front end. That's not necessary. You don't have to do it that way. The benefit to doing it that way, though, for me, is that when I fill out my backend, and by backend, I'm talking about Ruby on Rails, the database, the information, the data structure, all of that. What it does is it gives me in the end, some data in my database to work with, so that when I get to my front end part, I have some data to play with and to render onto my web page. So I can kind of see how things are looking. It's a little easier for me to conceptualize it that way. So we're going to do some back end work first and then move into the front end. So in this case, we are going to have two models. We want to have Pokemon trainers and we want to have Pokemon. So what I'm going to do is we're going to generate two models. I know that in the past, I have done some design work in Lucidchart. I'm not going to do that this time just because this one's going to be very, very simple. It's just two models, trainers and Pokemon. Pokemon will belong to trainers, and that's that. So let's go ahead and get some models created. So I'm going to do Rails G model, and I'm going to do trainer. And for trainer, as far as the attributes go that I want to give it, each trainer is going to have a name, and you don't have to specify string. String is the default data type for every attribute. I always specify it though. I just like to be overly declarative whenever I'm programming. So yeah, Rails G model trainer, it will have a name. Let's also give it a location. This will also be a string because I noticed it in Faker, there's a Pokemon, a location generator. So we're going to put each trainer in a specific Pokemon, a locale. Cool. So we'll do that. I think that's probably pretty good. So Rails G model trainer, name string, location string. That should be good. So hit enter. Cool. So we created our model for our trainer. So what this did is it created a couple things for us. It created a model file for us right here. You can see it's empty. You know, it's got this class declaration here, but you know, there's nothing inside of it. That's fine. And then it also, whenever we ran that command, it created a migration for us, which I think is in db migrate and then here. And whenever we run db migrate, it's going to run this file and it's going to do this in our database. It's going to create a table for us, and then it's going to create some columns in that table. The table is going to be named trainer or trainers, and that table is going to have a name column and a location column. So every time we create a trainer, we can fill out a name and a location for that trainer. Remember, by default, every time you create an instance of a model, in this case, every time we create an instance of a trainer, an ID number is also going to be generated and assigned to that instance of the model. In this case, it's going to be assigned to that trainer. So cool. All right, so next, let's go ahead and create our Pokemon model. So we're going to do Rails G model Pokemon, and Pokemon are going to have a name, and we'll just leave it at that. We'll just give them a name. Now, remember, in our database design and our model setup, we have Pokemon belonging to trainers. So here is where we want to specify that the Pokemon are going to belong to the trainers. And so here is where we're going to go trainer dot belongs to. So let's go ahead and
got a question.
Yep.
Does it matter if you do both models before you do both of your controllers?
It does not matter. No, the only thing that matters order-wise is that if you want to create a child model that's going to belong to a parent one, the parent needs to be created first. Or else whenever you run, you know, in this case, if we hadn't created trainer, but we ran this and we said trainer belongs to, Rails would get confused and be like, I don't know what that means, and it would probably throw an error. But yeah, you don't have to create your controllers right after your models. All right, so we're going to go ahead and have that, and we'll hit run. Cool. All right, so now we got 2 migration files. We got one for our Pokemons. Rails doesn't know the word Pokemon, so it doesn't know that there's like a plural. I think Pokemon is the same word for both the singular and the plural, but for our programming purposes, we're going to throw an S there on the end, just for our back end. So cool. So we got our Pokemons. They belong to trainer. They have that foreign key for trainer, which means they're going to be assigned a trainer ID. Let's just double check that. So we can actually go into our schema.rb. Oh, we don't have a schema because we haven't run our migration. So we have our models. Let's now do Rails DB migrate. That's going to run our migration files. Perfect. And now we have a schema. And cool, we got Pokemons with a name and a trainer ID. So each Pokemon is going to be assigned to a trainer. Then we got our trainers with a name and a location. And in this case, everything's going to be a string. So super simple. So cool. All right, so there's that. The next thing I like to do after I create my models is to go in and create my controllers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go Rails G controller trainers. Now remember, whenever you generate models, the model name needs to be in the singular when you generate the controllers. For that model, the controller name needs to be in the plural. So in this case, we're going to do Rails G controller trainers. And I'm just going to look up a really quick piece of syntax. I don't know, I always forget these like little tiny things. Let's see, for controllers, or Rails G controllers, trainers. Okay, cool, yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and just by default give it these functions. And I'm going to skip out. So what this will do is this is going to generate a controller file that'll be called the trainers controller.rb, and it's already going to have these empty functions stubbed out for me, which is exactly what I want. So we'll do Rails G controller trainers and do that. Hit enter. Cool. So created that. So now if we go into our controllers folder, we'll see that we now have a trainers controller, and we can see that it created the index, show, new, and edit functions for us. So these are just empty functions. They've just been stubbed out. So they don't do anything. There's nothing inside of there. What we will do eventually is go in and actually, make some changes there, but we'll get to that in a minute. So we're also going to want a Pokemons controller. So let's go ahead and generate that. So Rails G controller Pokemons. And then we want to do index, show, edit, or new edit. And then we'll do skip routes. What the skip routes does is it doesn't generate routes for me automatically. It lets me decide how I want to generate those routes, which I like to do. So I'll go ahead and do skip routes. Make sure that's right. Okay, cool. Hit enter. All right, sweet. So now we got the Pokemon's controller and our trainers controller. Sweet. So what we can do now is start to fill out some of our stuff. So the first thing that I want to do actually is I want to generate some seeds data. So I'm going to open up my seeds file, and right now my database is empty. There's nothing inside of it. So if I filled out, my trainers controller and my Pokemon's controller, and I filled out my views with some JavaScript React components, and in each of these I put render component, and then I passed props that's going to equal, the specific model, say trainers.all or Pokemon.all, and then I went to my component and I tried to render out some data. Nothing's going to show up because my database is empty. I don't have any data there. It'll just be blank. So I want to actually create some data. So I'm going to require Faker. I think that's how you do it, by putting that in there in quotes. But yeah, we'll do that. And then just to be safe, I'm going to do trainers dot destroy all. So it's going to destroy any existing trainers and Pokemon every time this runs. Right now we don't have any, so it's not really going to do anything. But if I ever need to run my seed file again, it'll clear those out and let me kind of start fresh. Okay, so I want to now work on my trainers. I need to generate some trainers. So let's say I want to have 5 trainers. So I'm going to do 5 dot times do. And what the dot times does in Ruby, it creates a code block that will run whatever code is inside of here this number of times. In this case, it's going to be 5. So in here, I want to run the create trainer code 5 times. But every time it runs, I want to give that trainer a unique random name. That's where Faker is going to come in. So I'm going to do trainer.create, and then I'm going to do name, and then now let's go to Faker. So we're not going to get the name in our Pokemon generator. Let's go to the general Faker generator. So the default here, let's look for name. There should be a name in here. Here we go, Faker name. Cool. And then I want just a name. So I'm going to basically just copy that. If I wanted any of these other things, I would copy that. But in this case, I just want just a normal name. I guess sometimes it'll have the senior or whatever at the end. That's fine. So let's go back to our code. And I'm just going to paste that here. So that is literally how Faker works. Super easy. Normally what I would do if I was going to hard code a name, I would say like Johnny, and have that there. But when you're using Faker, instead of the string, we're just going to paste that code that Faker gave us for a name. So this is just an example over here. So it's saying for Faker name, this is an example of the kind of name you'll get. If you do Faker name.firstName, this is an example of the kind of name you'll get, and so on. So that's literally all you do. You just replace the value with this code that you get from the Faker GitHub site. So super simple. Okay, so we want a name, and then we also have a location. So let's go back here. Let's go back down to our Pokemon. I think it's in, where's games? Games, Pokemon, and there we go. Location, sweet. So each trainer is going to be in a specific Pokemon location. I think I messed that up. Yeah, Pokemon, I didn't grab the location. There we go. So location is going to equal that. Remember, the location is going to be a string. And so what I could do is I could say like Salt Lake City, and what this would do is it would generate a trainer 5 times. Each time the name would be a random Faker name, but the location would be Salt Lake City. So all of my trainers would live in Salt Lake City. I don't want that. So I'm going to replace the entire string with that code that I got from Faker right here. And I think I accidentally didn't copy all of it, but you take that whole thing and just put that there. And that's literally all you have to do for Faker. It's pretty nice.
Would you be able to create like an array and then do like random and just like choose from that array?
You definitely could. So if you were to come out here, say do @r equals, and then have an array, and then say like SLC, and do LV for like Las Vegas and like NY for New York, then you could actually come here, and instead of that, you could do @r dot, I think there's there's random. There's also like, I want to say choose from, I think will give you random. I can't remember. I'd have to look up the exact syntax, but yes, you could do that exact same thing and it would generate a random thing from here. But I don't know all of the Pokemon city and town and gym names. And so I don't want to create an array by myself that'll do that. So that's where Faker is kind of nice. Is where it just like will it has all that data automatically and it'll choose from this giant bank of names. But yeah, that's a really good insight. You can definitely do that up here. Cool. All right, so we're gonna do that. So 5.times2 trainer.create. Cool. Okay, then what I want to do is I also want to create some Pokemon that will belong to each trainer. So if you remember, when we generated the Pokemon model, we set it to belongs to. However, there's one more thing we have to do. We have to go inside of our model for trainer and set it to a has many for Pokemon. So let's go into our model for trainer. Cool. And in here, we have to now reverse designate it. So we already told Pokemon that it belongs to trainer. We now need to tell trainer that it has many Pokemon. And we do that in the model. So you just say has underscore many, and then I'm going to say Pokemons. It has to be the plural. And then I'm going to also add this little piece of code, dependent destroy. What this says is whenever I destroy a trainer in my database, that sounds very like mean, but whenever I destroy a trainer in my database, it's also going to destroy any dependents that it has, any dependent models that it has. So in this case, the dependent model for trainer is Pokemon. So it will destroy the trainer that I want and all of the Pokemon that that trainer has, which is a good thing. In this case, that's what we want. We don't want to have just wild, lone, like rogue Pokemon out there that don't belong to a trainer. That's just a recipe for disaster. So let's go ahead. We'll save that. Sweet. Okay. So now we're back in here. So I'm going to do something a little bit different. So let me think this through. I haven't done this in a while. So I'm going to create a variable here. I'm going to call it at, actually, let's see, I equal 0. Okay, yeah, okay. I'm going to do at, I'm going to do ID num like that. And what this is going to do is I'm going to say ID num equals 0. And then in here, I'm going to say at ID num plus equals 1. Okay. So what this does is I have a variable that I'm calling ID num. This is going to stand for the ID number that the trainer gets. And what I want to do with that is, well, actually, I wonder if I need to do that. Trainer.id. Let me think this through really quick. I don't, yeah, I think I do need to do that. So we'll try this. That'll be a little experiment. But what'll happen is ID number is going to equal 0. Then in this block, the first thing that's going to happen is this value is going to be the value that already is 0 plus 1. So ID is going to equal what it is plus 1. So in this case, ID is going to equal 1. Okay, then we'll create our trainer. Perfect. Then what I want to do is inside of this times loop, this loop here, I want to do another times loop. And I want each trainer to have, I don't know, what's the normal number of Pokemon? Like 4, 5? We'll say 5. We'll give them 7. 7 Pokemon. So we're gonna do 7 times do, and here we're going to create our Pokemon. So we're going to do Pokemon dot create, and we're going to do name. And let me just make sure I know what I'm doing. Okay, yeah. So Faker Games Pokemon dot name. What we need for that, so tab and space. Cool. So each Pokemon will have a name, and I think that's all we gave the Pokemon was a name. So that should be good. But it also needs a trainer ID. And the trainer ID is going to be our ID num. Okay, so let me kind of just walk through that logic. So in this 5 times loop, this is going to happen. The ID number is going to be incremented by 1. We're going to create a trainer. Then 7 times we're going to create a Pokemon. And the Pokemon is going to have a random name. So each 7 Pokemon will have a random Pokemon name. And it's going to be set to this ID number. So the first time this runs in here, in this number 5, this ID number is going to be 1. Sweet. Then this is going to run again. And the second time it runs, ID number is going to equal 2. We're going to create a second trainer. Then we're going to create 7 more Pokemon. And these Pokemon are going to belong to trainer ID number 2. So what I'm doing is I'm creating 7 Pokemon for every trainer I create. And I'm assigning the new ID number to that trainer. So what we should get is a series of 7 times 5, is that 35? We should have 35 Pokemon that will all belong to a different trainer, which is what we want. So we're going to do, yep.
For this ID number that you're doing, is it different than the one that automatically generates?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it is different. That's where that primary key and foreign key comes into play. So every time you create a model, it's going to be given a primary key. That is that model's ID number. So every trainer is going to have its own model or its own ID. Every Pokemon is going to have its own ID. But models that belong to other models get an additional ID number. That's called the foreign key. And that foreign key is usually the model name underscore ID. And that's what designates what model the child belongs to. Does that make sense?
I mean, it makes sense, but like when you look at your schema, like it already generates it. So I'm kind of wondering what we're doing here in the seeds file. It's just like, because every time you delete and re-add your seeds, it'll be a different ID, like a higher ID number. So are you always just making it equal to like 1 through 10 or whatever?
So yeah, when you say it already generates it, are you talking to this right here?
Yeah.
Okay, so what it does is, what this is, these are the tables in our database that get generated. But when we create a Pokemon, the trainer ID does not automatically get generated. So just like the name doesn't automatically get generated, we have to tell Ruby what the name is. And in this case, we're telling it here. We also have to tell it what the trainer ID is. And we're telling it there. Because if we didn't do that, Ruby wouldn't know which trainer our Pokemon belongs to. But the primary key does get automatically assigned. And you'll see that in here, there's not an ID inside of our schema. Like Pokemon has a trainer ID, but Pokemon doesn't have its own Pokemon ID inside of the schema. Same with trainer. Trainers, there's no ID inside of here. That's because those primary keys, those IDs are in the background. They're generated automatically. We don't see that. But we know that those numbers get generated in numerical order. So one thing to note too is whenever you run db seed and you run your destroy all, this will essentially reset those ID numbers. When you have a live application with a database that you don't destroy and you don't reseed, those ID numbers aren't going to reset. But when you're working in a development environment where you're always, not always, sometimes reseeding, it will get reset, and those primary keys will set back to 0 and regenerate. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, we'll go through this and we'll see if it makes sense. So, all right, so at the very end, I'm going to put trainers created, Pokemon collected, exclamation point, because why not? We'll do a save. Okay, so now let's run our DB seed. So we're going to do Rails DB seed. Hopefully it works. Underscore constant trainers. All right, so there's some. Oh, trainer Pokemon. There we go. This needs to reference the model, so that'll be singular. Cool. All right. Run this again. Rails DB seed. Cool. Trainers created, Pokemon collected. All right. So what I'm going to do is I like to, as soon as I seed my data, I like to go into my Rails console. And in here, I like to just make sure I got all my data. So I'm going to do trainer.all. And this should give me all of my trainers. Sweet. So here we go. We got Abe Douglas from Jubilee City. We've got Shin Rube, the dentist from Goldenrod City. Representative Madeline Luschke from whatever the heck that is. James Hayes, the personal accountant, CPA from Celestic Town. These are our trainers. And you can see that in my seeds file here, trainer.create, I gave it a name and a location, but I did not give it an ID number. Like I did not specify an ID number in here, but if you look here, you can see that each of these trainers has an ID number automatically assigned to them in Rails. And that ID number goes numerically 1 through 5. So now, when I create my Pokemon, these Pokemon, all 7 of these Pokemon, whenever they are created, will belong to the same trainer. And then it comes back to this loop here. The ID number will increment by 1 more. We'll create another trainer, create 7 more Pokemon with now a new ID number. That'll be 1 with a new trainer ID, which will be +1 over the last time. So if I go here, we'll do go down, Q, exit, cool. Now, if I do Pokemon.all, this should give me 35 Pokemon. So let's go down, almost there. It's like hurting my eyes. Cool, we got our 35 Pokemon here. And you'll see that they all belong to a different trainer. Well, not all. The groups of 7 will belong to 1 trainer. So Pokemon with the IDs 1 through 7 should belong to with the trainer with the ID of 1. So Charmander, blah, 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 all these guys will belong to trainer number 1. So there's Pokemon 7, trainer number 1. Now, starting with Pokemon 8 and 8 through 15 or whatever should belong to Pokemon trainer 2. Let's see. Sweet. All right, so there we go. Starting with number 8, our Shelder belongs to trainer number 2. So that way, I assigned 7 Pokemon to each of my 5 trainers. Does that like logic sort of make sense Landon, or is that still confusing?
Yeah, I've got the same thing without the ID number and the trainer ID number. So if you reset,
Oh,
does it start at 1 or does it start from where your last one was? Because mine, if I reset, if I'm at, 8, then it'll start at 9.
oh, interesting. That could be what happens. Let me just check. Let's do quick exit Rails DB seed. That could be what happens. So we'll do that, and then we'll do Rails C Pokemon.all. Ah, okay, yes. So you're right. I didn't get any Pokemon because you're right. It did start from ID 8 for the trainers, but these are still being assigned this like according to this numbering system. So they're going to be assigned to trainers 1 through 7, but the trainer ID is required to create a Pokemon. So that's why my array is empty. Like I don't have any Pokemon there. So,
So I'm in the same thing. It's automatically creating a trainer ID and assigning it to the right person.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, let me try that. We'll do that. Save. Exit Rails DB seed. Cool. And then we'll do Rails C. That's good. That does that. I didn't know that worked that way, which is super cool. So we'll do Pokemon.all. Yeah. See, I'm not getting that. So
Try
I'm
Pokemon
not.
up last, maybe, or Pokemon up first.
Pokemon.first. Yeah, getting a nil. So yeah, I'm not sure what your seeds file is doing to automatically assign it to the trainer. What you might be able to do is do that. And I wonder if that would, or actually, I wonder if I do, actually, I'm going to do T equals that. And then I'm going to do this should work. T.id, save. Cool. Okay. And then I think if I run this, Rails DB seed, Rails C, and Pokemon.all. Cool. There we go. So now it's working. So yeah, so what I did this time is, and this is probably the better way to do it because it's more dynamic. It allows me to reseed without resetting my database. That's actually a good point. I didn't realize that doing the DBC didn't do a DB reset, which makes sense. But if you run the command Rails DB reset, or if you do Rails DB drop and then your DB create, you will start over from 0. But we're not doing that. And so what I'm doing is instead is that every time I create a trainer, I'm setting it to this local variable T. So T is going to equal this new trainer I'm creating. Then I'm just setting the trainer ID to the T.id of whatever trainer I just created. And that should be good. So, but I'm not sure. So in your seeds file, Landon, you don't explicitly set trainer ID.
I don't. I can Slack you it.
Yeah, Slack it to me. We'll look at it a little later. I don't want to spend too much time on like the seeds file, but yeah, I want to look at that. I'm curious like what you're doing to make that work. So okay, cool. But anyways, yeah. So there are our Pokemon. So we've got our Pokemon created, and we've got our trainers created, and the relationships are there, which is great. So the next thing that we want to do is let's see, let's start subbing out some of our actually let's go into our controller. Let's do our controller first. So okay, so So we've got our models, we've run our seeds file, we've got some data. Now let's go through and fill out our controllers. So in our trainers controller, the first thing we have is our index. And the index method is usually the method that we use in order to display all of one type of model. In this case, we're in the trainers controller, so we want to display all of the trainers. So I'm just going to create a variable called trainers, and it's going to equal trainer.all. And that will be all of my trainers. Then I want this method to render a specific React component. So I'm going to do render component, and then I'm going to do trainers. So I'll have a trainers component. Then I need to pass in some props. I'm going to do trainers, and this is where I'm going to pass it my trainer.all, which is stored in my variable at trainers, which is right here. And this is my Ruby hash. So it has this key value pair here. And this will allow, like, we're going to call inside of our React, we're going to call this key here, which is going to give us access to the value inside of our controller, which is going to equal the trainer.all. So we've got that stubbed out. Let's go to our show method. So for the show, we want to show one specific trainer. So I'm going to do, let's see, what do I want to do for this? I think actually, in this case, we need to find the specific trainer that we want to show. And the way that we're going to do this is you can call this before action in your controllers in Rails, which will run whatever methods you set here before anything happens in your controller. So before everything, I want to set my trainer. And typically, you only do this for some of your methods. So I like to specify them. I'm going to show it for show, update, edit, and destroy. And we'll add our update and destroy methods in a minute. So, and what we need to do then is we need to create some private methods. And these private methods will run only inside of our controller. They're not going to go outside of our controller. But one of those private methods is going to be this set trainer method. So we're going to stub it out here. So def set trainer. And then here we're going to find our specific trainer. And this is going to be, we're going to set it to at trainer. And we want to find it using the params inside of the URL that we're going to be accessing. So we're going to do trainer.find param ID like that. And this should give us access to our trainer. So now inside of here, what we want to do for the show is we want to do render component, and we're going to render a trainer specific component. So we have like a trainer.js, and we're going to pass some props, and those props will be trainer and then at trainer. Cool. So there's our show. I think that's all we need for show. For new, it's going to be very similar. We're going to go ahead and do a render component, and we'll call this trainer new. And so the new method typically only renders a component or a page. And that page usually has a form on it that allows you to add a new trainer. We don't need access really to any of this information, like our trainers or our trainer data that's in our backend in our database, because we don't need to display that on this form. It's just going to be like add a new trainer, and then, you know, have like the name, location, etc. So there's that. And then for edit, I think the edit is going to be similar to new. However, we will need access to some of our data, because when you go to the edit page, you want the form to be pre-filled out with whatever trainer we're going to edit. So if you click like, we want to edit like representative Madeline, whatever her name was, when we go to that form, we want the name field to already have her name there so we can see it, delete it, or make changes to that. So we're going to render a component, which we haven't created yet, but we will. And we'll call this trainer edit. And then we are going to want to pass props, and we're going to want our trainer prop at trainer. Cool. So we got that. In addition to edit, this is just going to be the form. We actually need to create the function that's going to perform the update to our database. And so the way that we do that is, and this is kind of just Rails like best practices. It's kind of almost always how you're going to create your update method. But you say if trainer.update, and we need to pass in some trainer params, and we're going to run trainer params down here. And we want those trainer params to be params. This is where we basically decide what is required inside of our update. So we want to require that there is a trainer that is being updated, and we want to permit name and location. Cool. And then I think we also need to run, we have that. We also need to run for action trainer param. We need to run that before action as well. Okay, so if at trainer.update, so what this is saying is, if when we hit submit, if the trainer successfully updates, then we want to do something. And what that's going to do is, in this case, let's do a redirect to, and I don't know where I want to redirect to just yet. So I'm going to like need to fill out where to redirect. I'm going to leave that blank and just kind of keep that open-ended for now. I'll do an else, oops, just in case I need that. I don't think we'll need that, but we'll leave that there. Cool. All right, so this should be pretty good for now. So what we want to do now is, well, what we're able to do now is we can move on to our front end. So we could go and fill out our Pokemon controller, but let's not worry about that just yet. Let's go and hit our front end a little bit and make sure that we're able to see some of our trainer information here. So the way that we're going to do that is we are going.
You create a create method.
Index show new, and oh, good call. Yep, yeah, we do need a create method. So the create method is analogous to the update method in that we have a new page that actually creates the record for us. When we update, we have an edit page, and then we have an update function that actually updates it for us. So like new and create go together the same way that edit and update go together. New renders the page, just like edit renders the page, and both those pages will be a form. But then create actually runs the logic that is going to like do that for us. So yeah, let's fill out our create. That's a good call. So to do the create, the way that you do this typically is we're going to do an at trainer. We're going to say at trainer equals trainer.new. So it's very similar to our seeds file, only instead of create, we're going to do .new, and we're going to pass in our trainer params there. Then we do an if-else statement. So we do if at trainer.save. And these if-else statements, again, you're always going to fill out your create and your update this way. And like, I don't know exactly why you have to check if it updates to make it happen. Just like when you do a create, you have to check if it actually saves to your database. Like, I don't know exactly why that has to happen. But I just know that you do have to set it up that way. So it's just one of those things where it's like, I don't know the exact why. James might, I'm sure there are people that do. But for my sake, I just know that I have to set it up that way, and that's cool. So here, I also want to do a redirect to, but I don't really know where I want to go yet. Need to fill out still. Cool. Yeah, that's a good catch. We need our create method. Cool. All right, so let's go ahead and
What about the destroy as well?
Oh my gosh, yeah, good call, destroy. Let's do destroy. What would have happened is, like, I would have tried to do these and then it would have thrown an error, like, oh yeah, we need to go back and do that. So, but yeah, let's go ahead and just do that. So yeah, we also need our destroy method. So that's going to finish out our CRUD actions. We'll have our create, our read, our update, and our destroy. So for destroy, I don't think we want to show a page for destroy. We just want it to run maybe when we click like a destroy Pokemon trainer button, which is like just so violent, but you know, it is what it is. It's Pokemon. So we're going to do at trainer.destroy. This is not destroy. This method .destroy, if you run it on a model, it will delete it from your database. So yeah, so we want to do that. And then we also want to do a redirect here because we want it to destroy, but then we want to go somewhere. I don't know where I want to go yet. So I'm just going to step that out. That we still need to fill that out. Okay. Am I missing anything else? I think that's everything. For index, show, new create, edit, update, destroy. We've got our private methods here, set trainer, trainer params, required trainer. Yeah, that should be good. Okay. Before we go on to the front end, do any of you have any questions on what we've done so far with models, seeds file, controllers? Cool. All right, so let's go ahead and let's move on to our front end. But actually, before we do that, we actually need to set up a file called routes. So our routes file is where we set up our route. So when we just go to localhost 3000, or when this website is live, when we go to just the whatever url.com, this is going to decide what method in our controller gets loaded and what shows. So to do that, you do root, and then you call whatever method you want to have show up there. In this case, we want our trainers controller, and we want the index to show. We want the first page to list all of our trainers, or to show all of our trainers. So we'll do that. The next thing I want to do is you can do a shortcut in your routes where you can use this keyword called resources. And when you do resources and then the name of a model, sorry, not the name of a model, the name of a controller, it will create routes for you that are based off of those basic CRUD actions. So it will create like a new, create, destroy, etc. for you. You can also make custom routes. We're not going to get into that today, like outside of those basic card actions, but yeah, so I almost always use resources. It's just a really good, I don't know, it's a good tool to have. Then what we want to do is whenever you have a model that belongs to another model, you have to nest your resource tree. So I like to do, so inside of the resources trainers, you do a do end block, and then you do resources again, but you add the controller for the child model. In this case, it's going to be Pokemon. So we have resources for trainers. It's going to create those routes for us. Then connected to those routes, we're going to create the Pokemon resource tree.
And is it just JavaScript that has to be capitalized?
Just, what do you mean?
Like when we're trying to add functions to it, it just confuses me because he said that we're supposed to capitalize some things, and yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, we'll talk about that in just a second, actually, when we get into React. But like there are some things you have to capitalize in Ruby on Rails. Like for example, like in your seeds file, whenever you refer to the model, it needs to be capitalized. So trainer.destroy Pokemon, trainer.create Pokemon.create. That needs to be capitalized. I mean, there's some other things too. I think, I mean, like in here, you know, we're referring to those models, so you know, we capitalize those here. And yes, in React as well, there are some specific things you have to capitalize, and then there's some things that you don't have to. So we'll definitely talk about that. But yeah, okay, so we've got our routes set up. So I'm just going to really quick check something. I'm going to run my server, Rails S, and make sure it's running. Cool. Hit refresh. Cool. Param is missing or the value is empty. Trainer, did you mean controller? Where's that at? Controller of params that require trainer. See, in my trainer params that require. Oh, you know what? Let me, I think I know what I did. So I think actually, let's see, inside of, let's go to trainers controller. I don't think I need to do that. And then we have here, params.require trainer.permit name and location. I think that should be right. Let me try refreshing this. Do this. Do refresh. Thinking about it. Okay. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so this is what we want. So this is a good error. The way that I know it's a good error is, for one, it's a JavaScript error, and it's saying you likely forgot to export your component from the file. That's because we haven't created any files for our JavaScript. That's good. But what I really wanted to check was my routes. So in here, we should have our basic routes for both trainers and Pokemon. So let's just check to make sure we've got that. So yeah, we've got the index for trainers, index for Pokemon, create, new, edit, show, update, destroy for Pokemon. We've got the same for trainers. Cool. So our routes are good to go. It means we're going to have our URLs that we need. We're going to have our verbs that we need, and we're going to have our our paths that we're going to need. So that's good. Cool. All right. So now let's go ahead and move on to the front end a little bit. So I'm trying to remember exactly how James did this. I think that what he did is he had you guys just create these files in your terminal. Again, this is kind of specific to like the SSR way of doing React, which is kind of what we're doing right now. So I'm going to do kind of the same thing. So to do Control C. All right. So to start out with our front end, we need to create some files that are going to correspond to these components. We need trainers, trainer, trainer new, and trainer edit. So let's go ahead and create those. So to create a file in your terminal, you use the keyword touch. And we want these, so we're in our root folder, my DPL blog example. I should have named it Pokemon example. This is before I knew it was going to be Pokemon, but that's okay. So we're in our root folder. So we're like in here. We want to create these inside of app, inside of JavaScript, inside of components, and then we want to name our files. So we're going to have trainers.js. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's just make sure that added it. We'll do app. We'll do JavaScript components. Boom. There's trainers.js. Cool. Let's do that same thing, but we're going to do trainer.js for our trainer show. Do another one for our trainer new. And do one more for our trainer edit. All right. So now we should have all of these guys, which is exactly what we want. Okay. So now, Katrina, is where we're going to talk about JavaScript functions and like what you need to capitalize and what you don't need to capitalize. So I am going to go ahead and start with my trainers component here. So one thing to know is when you're dealing with React, whenever you have a React.js file, they're usually referred to as components. And so this trainers.js file is going to be the trainers component. That's why in here, in our index, we're saying render component trainers. So Ruby on Rails is saying, okay, cool. I'm going to go now look inside of the JavaScript / components folder for a JS file called trainers. That's what this guy is. So we're going to go more in depth on React starting next week or the week after, and there's a lot to go into, and we're going to talk about everything that has to do with React. So I wouldn't get too hung up on a lot of the syntax that's going on because we're going to talk about it more in depth, and I don't want to get too far ahead of that. But needless to say, starting out, there's kind of a template that you follow every time you create a JavaScript, not a JavaScript, a React component. Just like when you create a controller, for example, in Rails, there's kind of a template you follow. You want to have an index method, you want to have a show method, new, create, edit. You know that you're going to want to have those things. You're probably going to want to have a private method that's going to set, your model. You're going to probably want to have some params that get set. So that whenever you look at a controller, they're all going to kind of look a little bit similar. Same with React components. So the first thing that you do for a React component is you have to import React from React. That's just like, I don't know, standard thing. I think in the current version of React, you don't technically have to do it, but I like to do it because not everyone globally is on the same version of React. What this does is it just tells this file that we're going to be using React and we want to be able to have access to all of the functionality that React gives us. It's just like in our seeds file whenever we say require faker. Like if we don't put that here, this faker command's not going to work. Ruby on Rails is going to be like, what? But this tells Ruby on Rails, oh, okay, cool. Let's look for the Faker gem. Cool, we got it. Now we have access to everything that Faker lets us do. So that's kind of what this does. Okay, the next thing that you do is after your imports is you stub out your component. And components are basically just JavaScript functions. The only difference is that you capitalize the name of this function. Normally in JavaScript, you don't capitalize the function name. Same as Ruby. If we look in here, the function name for our index function is index. It's not capitalized. That's fine. But when we name the component in that component function, that is where we do capitalize it. So I'm going to call it trainers. And you do equals, do props, arrow, and then curly braces. So this is like always basically how you're going to set up your component. Is our component name is trainers because it's going to be the same as our file name. So trainers.js, that means that our component name has to be trainers and it's going to be capitalized. The next thing that you have to do is you have to export your component. This line here kind of sends out a signal into our application and allows Ruby on Rails to look for this component. If we don't have this, Ruby on Rails won't be able to see this component. This export sends out this name. It's like, hey, there's a component here named trainers, and it allows Ruby on Rails to see that. So right here, where we, in our controller, where we're rendering the component called trainers, it's looking for that. So if we go back to this error, it's like you likely forgot to export your component. That's because it's trying to find a component called trainers, but it can't because this hasn't been exported. So there's that. The next piece of, I guess, like the component like template or the component like skeleton is you have a return function. And every component in React, for the most part, is going to have a return function. And this is the basic setup for every single component. They're all going to look like this. They're going to have the import section at the top. You're going to start dealing with React components where you're going to import like tons of stuff at the top. And all that's going to go at the top. Beneath your imports, you define your component. So const component name capitalized equals. In this case, we're going to be looking for props. This won't always be the case, but for now, that's what we're going to be doing. So equals and props, arrow, and then curly braces. Then inside of here, we need a return function. And that is like our basic React component skeleton. So what I'm going to do is just to test this out, I'm going to add a div and I'm going to add an H1. And I'm just going to say all Pokemon trainers, exclamation point, save. Now it's being exported. It should be returning a div. So this is some HTML. It's technically JSX. It's not actually HTML, but it's very, very similar. Syntactically, it's almost exactly the same thing, but yeah, it's JSX. And it's div with an H1 saying all Pokemon trainers. So now if I refresh this page, it should show that. Oh, I don't think my server's on. It's not. It's on our server. Cool. Oh. And refresh.
I really understand why people have like 3 monitors now.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I only have 2. Like I have like my MacBook and then I have like one external monitor. But I mean, I've got like Chrome up where I'm like Googling stuff all the time. I've got my like 3 instances of my terminal. I've got another Chrome window up that shows my local host. Then I've got my code. It's just like, you know, it's all laid out. So, but yeah, cool. So there we go. So there is our thing. Can you guys still see my screen? Okay, perfect, cool. So that's working. That's great. That's like actually like wonderful. That's everything that we wanted. So, well, it's not everything, but close. So the next thing we're gonna do is, you know, we can like type in whatever we want. We can make an entire HTML, CSS page. We can like put in some p tags, be like, "Sup, y'all? Pokemon in the house." You know, save that. Come back here, refresh, and that should show up once it refreshes. Cool. There we go. And we could like style this up. We can do whatever we want. It's pretty cool, but that's kind of boring. What we really want is we want to have access to the data that we seeded in here. And we want to be able to make changes to it. We want to be able to see it. We want to be able to delete it. We want to be able to add to it. So to do that, we're going to look at what we did here in our controller, where for the index, and remember, the index is set to our root. The root is just localhost 3000. So when we go to localhost 3000, our trainer's index is going to run. If we look at our index function, it's going to render that component. So everything that we do inside of trainers is going to show up on localhost 3000. If we were to go to, another one, if we were to go to our show method, which would be, inside of our route. And here, one of our show methods, it would run our trainer component for the trainer show, and etc. So that's kind of what's going on there. All right, so let's get some access to our data. We don't have a whole lot of time left, so let me see how quickly we can like kind of burn through this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a const, and I'm going to do brackets. Don't worry about the syntax. Just know for now, this is how you have to do it. We'll get more into depth on like syntactically what's going on, but you can do a const, and then you're going to do the name, the key that we're looking for. And we're looking for that key there. When we reference that inside of our React component, it's going to give us access to this data. This data we can see equals this. And if you remember in my Rails console, when I ran trainer.all, it spat out all of my trainers and all of the related information. So we want to do const trainers equals props. Props is automatically coming over because we told it to inside of our controller. So we're referencing props here and we're pulling that off here. So now we have access to our trainers. So what we can do now is we can now create some functions inside of our component. And if you remember, a JavaScript component or a React component is really just a JavaScript function, only has that capital name. So we're going to set up a function that's going to look really similar to our React component. So I'm going to do, I'm going to call this render trainers, right? I want to like render all my trainers. This is a pretty common way to name stuff. Equals, and we'll do that, that, and that. So this is how you set up a JavaScript function. This right here is exactly like this in Ruby, if you remember. So in Ruby for a method, and let's say we want to create a Ruby method called render trainers, we would do def render trainers end, and then we could fill out whatever that does. In JavaScript, we do const render trainers equals parentheses arrow bracket. That's the syntax for doing a JavaScript thing. Sorry about the dogs that I'm watching. They're like freaking out, but Okay, so inside of here, we want to do some stuff. We want to map over our trainer's data. So one thing to note is when you do mapping in JavaScript, you have to do 2 returns. This is like such an easy thing to forget, and you will forget it at some point, and it will throw an error, and it will drive you crazy for like an hour. So the sooner you can like remember that you have to have 2 returns, the better. So the first return is before we actually do the map. So when you return trainers.map, and then we're going to do a little variable. We're going to call it trainer, do an arrow, curly braces. Then inside of here is where we're going to have another return. And we want to return some JSX. This JSX is going to look at each trainer individually. The word trainer is a placeholder for each trainer as it maps through all of the trainers that we have and allows us to render pieces of data from our trainer. So for example, our trainers have a name, they have an ID, they have a location, they have created that. We have access to all of that. The way we get access to it is by doing, I'm just doing H3, and I think I have to interpolate it in here, but I'm going to do trainer.name. So in JSX, if you want to bring in some JavaScript, you have to not interpolate, you have to surround it in curly braces. So we have some JSX here, and we have our trainer.name in here. So I'm going to save this, and when I refresh my page, what should happen is I should have all 7 of my trainer names listed out in an H3 tag. Beneath my, oh wait, sorry, no, I won't have that because I need to actually call this. So this function is here, but this is just a function definition. In order to actually run it, you have to call it. So I'm going to call it down here in my components return function. I'm going to do render trainers and then parentheses. So you always have to add the parentheses at the end of your function names whenever you call functions in JavaScript. That's just part of the syntax, is how JavaScript was written. So, all right, so now we should see all of our names, hopefully. Cool. All right, we got Lucy Larson, Charles Seta Shanahan, DC, Dr. Tatum Miller. He must be like Professor Oaks. Kermit Leanan, Marcelina Krieger. These guys are awesome. Okay, so there is, yeah, that's us grabbing our trainer's data and returning that here. So yeah, it's almost 5:20. We didn't quite get to the CRUD actions. What I could do is next week, I could do another homework review that maybe like continues on with this if you guys want. I'll ask you next week, and if you want to do that, we can. If you don't, no big deal. But yeah, as far as where we've gotten to thus far, do any of you guys have any questions? Or is there anything confusing, or do you want me to go over anything in more detail? Cool. All right. In that case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop my server, and I'm just going to commit and push this to GitHub. We'll say backend created trainers created git push origin master. Cool. All right, so I've got that up on my GitHub. Let me go to it, and I'll send this out to you guys. Here, let me actually I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to stop the recording as well.